This is a really good, I would say, jumping off point
Sure.
conversation, because there's a you're we were just talking about your current partner
Yeah.
and of 4 years, and you're talking about how deep that she was, right? Or that she is.
Very. Oh, she's an incredibly deep person,
Huh.
and I mean, I mean, she. I mean, I don't think I don't think it's a coincidence that I've been really working on this notion of the inexhaustible
Yeah.
as the way of disclosing reality and the relationship I have with her. I'm going to keep referring to her neutrally because I don't think she'll want her name made public.
Yes.
And so I hope people understand that that doesn't mean any impersonality on my part towards her.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, that sense of the inexhaustibleness.
Yeah.
She's incredibly deep. And like I say, and I don't mean just intellectually, which she is, but especially spiritually and emotionally. And she's, this is an inadequate word. I find her so deeply mature, her ability to bring a kind of wisdom to bear on situations, but enmeshed with, with vulnerability, so that it calls out. She's reliably capable of calling out the very best in me, and she tells me that I do the same for her. And so that it continues to be a very, very profound experience, I believe, for both of us. So yeah, it's the way in which we're enmeshed together. I mean, all of these terms have been rendered trite, right? Because of our mass marketing and our overemphasis on romantic relationships. But
if we just pop was I get what I also heard in
sure.
I heard a few different things. Like one is I heard depth,
very much,
inexhaustible, capacity for wisdom,
yes,
and the ability to call out.
Yes. But of course, you hear me saying these all analytically, but they're not, right? They are all just different facets and aspects of the same thing, which, for lack of a better term, and I don't mean any commitment to a Christian Cartesian metaphysics, but this is Sarah's soul. And as I was about to say, I find her my soulmate. I feel we connect at sort of the foundations, right, of our psyches in a really profound and profoundly nourishing way. And so, and like I said, I mean, I would admire Sarah if I just knew her as a friend, because she's such an incredibly decent and deep. Oh, I said her name. I said I wasn't going to. Incredibly decent and deep person. So the fact that I feel very privileged to be in a relationship with her, and that's how it feels every day. I mean, we have our conflicts. Everybody does, because we're human beings. We're complex, and we're all wounded and traumatized by our pasts.
Right.
But what I have found is, and this has engendered a deep trust. I found that we are both capable of being vulnerable about our flaws and bringing them to real discussion that results in something more than just reconciliation when there's been conflict. It's more like a sense of a deeper reconnection in virtue of having discussed through the conflict and the issues. Please don't misunderstand me. I don't promote myself as any kind of advisor about romantic relationships. I'm just trying to answer your questions honestly, and try to do justice to this amazing person that I'm with.
Right. So that's, well, actually, what I'm hearing you say is not actually. It's actually, you're making a link between your connection with her, that's actually connecting to your work in the world right now.
Oh, tremendously.
Like, even to your interest, even when it's coming, like, in a certain sense, your relationship, and she is inspiring forth what you're seeing.
Yeah, very much.
I mean, what you're saying and what you're communicating into the world.
very much. I mean, so, I mean, first of all, just as a partner, she's tremendously supportive. She's just really supportive. Um, and, but she calls forth from me. There's no other way of putting it, because it's not something I can provoke or instigate.
Yeah.
But she calls forth from me.
Yeah.
It's the best poetry I've ever written. Sort of some of the most, I don't know what to call it, the most insightful philosophical realizations. Yeah, like I say, these words that we've crafted, they seem to fail. I mean, she's my best friend, but she's more than a friend. I mean, you're a good friend, and I appreciate that. And, you know, I value what we are cultivating together. I value it very deeply.
Yeah.
And so don't misunderstand what I'm about to say, but for Sarah, it's at a level that it's a level beyond that. And it's for both of us. It brings with it, therefore, a challenge. It's an odd thing to say that something so good is so challenging, precisely because it is so good. Because, you know, the brain is a prediction machine, and it prefers predictable unhappiness over surprising happiness. Definitely prefers predictable unhappiness over surprising happiness. It's just like, right? And so it's like, oh, this is a problem. The brain is going, oh, this is a problem. You're so happy, right? And I don't mean giddy. I mean happy in the sense of a deep sense of connectedness and meaning, right? And so the brain, your brain problematizes it, and then it tries to turn what I think is a pseudo problem, because of the unfamiliarity of the goodness, into a way of trying to say, well, you know, this is like something from the past in which you got hurt. And so we talk about those kinds of things a lot. We bring it up. We bring up, you know, how if you'll allow me, the sunlight of the goodness casts the shadow of doubt. And as the sunlight gets more intense, the shadow seems to darken in a corresponding manner. And you have to keep reconnecting to each other. And that's tricky, right? Because you're trying to express this need, with the need we all have, without deifying the person in any way, or reifying the person in any way. And, you know, and to deeply connect, while also really vouchsafing and caring about the person's autonomy. So these are all things that, again, as you want to get, I find at least, as you want to get so much closer to a person, all of the existential tensions that Tillich and Heidegger and Kierkegaard, and, right, even I suppose Nietzsche talk about, they get highlighted, and they get the energy of the relationship impregnates them, and they vibrate more and more and more. And so you have to get together and turn that vibration into sort of a dance that keeps you sort of resonating with each other.
Is it? I think what I'm hearing you say is that the difference, because I would imagine that those existential tensions can come up, and they can be when they come up, they can be the beginning of the end of a relationship, or the beginning of its possible flourishing.
Yes.
And I think what I'm hearing you say is that there's some kind of connection between the difference that makes that difference to vulnerability.
Oh, very much so. I mean, I have found, I mentioned this to you before, that my trust is usually engendered when I sense that somebody is willing to calibrate with me their degree of vulnerability. I mean, you don't want to be super vulnerable in every interaction, because that's not appropriate, right? Yeah. But with somebody who is going to see the depths of my vulnerability, she creates great trust in me, because she brings up and expresses a similar corresponding vulnerability. And I don't mean that in a needy sort of vampiric fashion in which she's trying to, save me or anything like that. No, that's where the maturity, the maturity gives her a centeredness. So that vulnerability is never something that is draining me. It's more something, like I said, what it does for me is it tends to engender a profound kind of resonant trust.
Yes. And and so that what I'm also hearing too in this, um, and this also harkens to me like things I've been thinking about myself for years and noticing and making sense of, is this, you've just made this connection between, I really appreciated it, between like these existential tensions, right? That that your relationship can be, well, one is they inherently bring them up, right?
Very much, very much.
But that the relationship can be like bring them up, and they can be a crucible, right? Is that what the word you use? Like the crucible.
I did use it, but it's a good word.
And like in a certain, in the Tillich sense of the word, or the existential sense of the word, of being the mechanism of their transformation, or the covering up in the demise, right?
I think so. I mean, again, I'm very wary of holding myself up as any kind of authority on this, because,
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's very much the case. I mean, part of what I've thought about this is perhaps part of the confusion. I mean, there's a lot of other historical reasons, so I'm not saying this is the sole cause.
Yeah.
But part of the confusion, I think people get into the romantic relationships where they try to elevate them to the status of God or something like that.
Yeah.
Is to I mean, I'll use some philosophical language here. It's to confuse a criterion with an entity, right? These relationships, they call up into our awareness some of our, deepest existential structures.
Right.
And I think we can therefore confuse that of their ability to call them up and accentuate them with thinking that they are the source and the remedy of those structures. And I think, and so people, I think, sometimes confuse the intensity of the feeling of these of the grammar of our ontology, our personal ontologies, right? With the idea that, well, that the relationship is the generator and the sustainer and the resolver of these. And I think that's a fundamental mistake. I think that's a very fundamental mistake.
Yeah, totally. And that being the case, at the same time, if we relate to, I would imagine this is part of the vulnerability that you're talking about, right? I come to you and I realize where I fall short. I realize where I imagine that you fall short. I see my own judgments, my own criticisms, my own, and I see yours on some level. And that there's a way in which that if I can, because my there's a big difference, I think, between vulnerability and exposure, right? Is that experience of being exposed, which usually has an element of, that's usually the kind of stuff that traumatizes us, right?
Yeah.
You're in the play guard and your friends come up behind you, they pull your pants down and there you are exposed, and then 10 years of therapy to kind of get over that.
Yeah, it's exposure usually brings shame.
Totally. And then there's vulnerability, which I think is what I'm hearing you talk about here in your relationship, is that there's like, oh, I've been more vulnerable, i.e. I've been more willing to volunteer to share what's difficult for me to share and revealing myself, right? Even if my experience of you is I feel it revealed, I would actually still I invite it on some level, or I volunteer.
It's a difference in the quality of the attention.
Seconds eventually.
Right? Pardon me? What did you just say? You just broke up.
Like, if not in the first few seconds, eventually.
Yeah. I mean, there's a phenomenological difference, right? There's a felt difference in the attention that you're let's use the word disclosure to be neutral between exposure and vulnerability. There seems to be a phenomenological difference in the attention to your disclosure. Whereas if in exposure, there's a sense of a violation, almost violence, of a penetration, right, into an area of weakness that could potentially be exploited. Whereas what I feel with what you're calling vulnerability, and I'm agreeing with that term, the attention feels instead nourishing. It feels like, yes, this hurts, or this is wounded, But it's not probative in the sense of, well, maybe I can exploit this weakness. It's instead, well, here's a way in which we can deeply connect, and here's how, you know, I can allow you perhaps to use me as a mirror to reflect upon that wound or that hurt. And so it's much more that I feel when I'm doing it with her, she's acting like this beneficent mirror. And I don't mean that in a dismissive fashion. I mean in a sense that instead of it being the hungry gaze that is seeking exploitation, it's instead the mindful mirror that's allowing me to look at and reflect upon this in a different way, in a different angle. Yeah. She's a master at that. And I mean that as a compliment. She can often get me to restructure my thinking when I'm in some of the depths of my wounds that I find extremely affording of me moving, changing, going to a different place than I've always been in. She says I do the same for her, and I have reason to believe this is true. And so this is part of what we regularly do with each other.
Wow. There's something there that just really highlights something really rich, which I believe is part of what Christopher and I were talking about.
Oh, that was an amazing conversation. Oh my gosh, he is so lyrical and articulate, and the depths that he brings up are so effortlessly. It's like, you know, someone is churning the depths of, you know, the Pacific Ocean, and stuff comes to the surface so readily for him. Totally. It's just so impressive.
Totally. Yeah. And one of the things he kept highlighting is after this conversation with him, that you're right, you know, him just expressing his thoughts they arrive in articulation, at least in that conversation. The other conversation I saw with him and Paul was a certain level of lyricalness, but like that expresses such deeply existential and religious structures just flow out of him, right? Yeah.
I deeply respect.
I kept finding myself landed in that sense, and I think one of the things that you're talking about is one of the things he really highlighted was this quality of just in the most basic forms of listening and speaking, and this how mysterious that is, right? Mm-hmm. Just the simple act of the most common thing that we do all day long, which is we talk to each other, right?
Yeah.
If you look at it, what I really kind of got from that conversation is if you look at just that in itself, and you actually just really look at it, it becomes more and more mysterious, right? And it's in the ontological sense of mystery.
Yeah, I'm reflecting. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much. And I mean, that's what I meant about the inexhaustibleness. I mean, there's one sense philosophically, theoretically, and I argue for this in some of my videos, and this is, you know, Blake's idea of to see a world in a grain of sand. You know, every lack of a better word, everything or every object has that potential for us. We could find anything, because everything is ultimately combinatorially explosive in what it is. I've coined this term as not the thing in itself, but the thing beyond itself. Everything is always beyond itself, right? And so, but there's something about, and I do have those experiences, I guess you'd call them mystical experiences of nature, or coming across a beautiful object, or sometimes just in deep meditation of the experience of the breath or the sense of life. So I do have those. But there's a quality that is, and this is something that I'm exploring in this work I'm doing on the next series about dialogue and dialectic, right? There's a quality that comes in there. It's almost like the third man factor that they talk about, where, you know, people get when they're, you know, in these expeditions, and they sort of mutually hallucinate this third presence that's there. But there's this element in dialogue, and I've been reading a lot about it. And trying to get that which is given. Steinbach, in his book on the phenomenology of mysticism, he's trying to talk about this, and he's trying to talk about because he argues that phenomenology is about trying to get oneself in a place where one can receive how things are giving themselves, right? It's similar to Heidegger's Gelassenheit. But he talks about that in this, I don't like this term, but we don't have better ones, this mystical aspect, right? There's an intense kind of givenness, because there's all these things we can do which we can provoke and we can make, right? And so we have this direct causal ability to provoke. But then there are these things that we can't provoke them. And Plotinus talks about this, right? You can't provoke the one into disclosing itself or appearing. You can do a lot to make yourself receptive, but its disclosure, its self-presencing, that is always a gift, because it is beyond, right? And I have to be careful here. I don't want people misreading me or misunderstanding me, but it's beyond your sort of agency and your sense. You can't provoke it into existence.
Right. So it's like, is it fair to say? So I think what you're talking about, and I'll ask you this, is the way that which can't be provoked, right, into existence in the dialogue, is that what happens? For example, when you name something in the dialogue, that moment where we realize that we're both, what's doing the talking, what we're talking about is what's doing the talking.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Those moments of like, oh, we're the logos, right? You're talking about the logos. All of a sudden you realize, oh, the logos is speaking right now. But there's this quality where that I didn't know it until we were already in it, right?
Yes.
The quality of like, until you said it, I wasn't recognizing that in fact was happening. But there's something about that is so intriguing to me, about that the most important thing that we would want to be able to point to and just happen and provoke, that even if we tried to do that, that we find ourselves already inside of it begun, right? That we couldn't provoke, has this quality of not recognizing it until we're already in it. So that's your moment, right?
I think there's a deep reason for that. Because I think, and this is the Plotinian idea, that ultimately like is only known by like, sort of the core of the conformity theory. I don't think you can recognize the logos except by means of being immersed in the logos. Right. I think that's one of the thrusting insights in the whole Platonic tradition, that, right, you can't recognize the logos until the logos is itself presence, because the logos puts you into, right, the very state by which its recognition is possible. It's the self-presencing of the logos that makes it possible for it to be, for it to become present to you. It's a grounding thing. It's very much like, if you are incapable of love, right, you can't recognize it in other people. You have to be in love to some degree to really recognize the love in another person. These things, this is what I mean by they're being participatory. We don't make them. We don't merely receive them. We're not passive victims. We're not purely active architects. We conform to them. We embody them, but we also, right, reach out to them and are called forth by them. These are all the things that are this is what I mean. I think the dialogos is a way of trying to make multiple people mutually receptive to the participation in the logos, and that's a very tricky thing. And one of the things that I thought gets lost is when Aristotle takes the logos and starts to turn it into logic, right? Then we lose. Logic is important, and I am not a person that denigrates logic, but one of the things we lose is because logic is something that over which we can exercise this mastery, right? We can get this control, right? We lose something important. I mean, Aristotle was trying to capture the normativity of the logos, the way it draws us and compels us. and how it calls us towards truth. And that's what was good in the logic. I get that.
Yeah.
But something is being lost. What you called, I guess, perhaps the mystery. But what I want to say is this sense of, right, participating in something, right, that takes on a life of its own. But it's like agape. That's why the Christians linked them so readily, agape and logos, because it precedes us. Even though it seems to take on a life of its own between us, so, like you said, as soon as we're in the recognition of it, we recognize that it has preceded us and grounded and afforded that very, that very, that emergence.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a bit of a speech, but there's so much going on there that I'm trying. Like, this is what I'm diving deeply into right now as I work on the next series, because I really am trying to understand all these dimensions of dialogue and dialectic, and the differences that came after and all that. I'm trying to get at, and I see, like, when I saw your two talks recently, the one you had with Chris and the one you had with Jordan Hall, both of those were like, there's stuff going on there. There's stuff going on there. And, what I want to, like, what I'm trying to get at is there's something here. Yeah. With what you're doing with the circling. Yeah. And I want to see how is that, because this is our challenge. How do we get back sort of what Aristotle rightfully found, but perhaps a little bit, I don't want to say mistakenly extricated from, but how do we bring back into the circling, the argumentation in the philosophical sense? How can we do philosophia together, right, with the circling, so the dialogue becomes the dialectic again? Yeah. Right, and that's what I'm trying to, like, how do we get them to talk to each other? Because it's not a simple case of, well, here's its essence and here's its essence, and I just stick them together, because that's exactly would be thwarted, right? But it's like, see, I'm gesturing in this grasping, reaching fashion. But can we bring the argumentation back? And I see people, my good friend Peter Lindbergh, trying to do this, right? He's trying to get, like, with his ideas about the anti-debate and stuff like that. He's trying to say, can we get something like the authentic relating and the argumentation back together again, so they're mutually facilitating and affording each other? And I see this is the core of the project that I'm wrestling with right now. Right.
So so there's part of part of the core of it is you're seeing it, and this is one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, in some level, like, we're this conversation right now for me is I'm hearing questions I had in other conversations that I've recently had that you've watched, right?
Yes.
One of the things I'm noticing is I'm watching myself. I'm going, okay, do the people that are watching know what I'm referring to, because they're so present? I have to keep an eye on that, because those other conversations are so present. And I just heard a way in which they're deeply present to you, and part of why they're present is that they're evoking the thing that you're trying to look at right now. Like, you're seeing possibilities of it glimmering forth, and it's kind of like in this moment you're like, you can tell I'm in the middle of it. I feel voluntarily and churned by you. Turned away.
Well, I hope it's like from the Hindu mythology, where we're able to churn the cosmic milk into butter or something like that. It doesn't feel fruitless. It feels fruitful, what's happening in me right now and the work I'm doing, and the resonance I'm seeing. And I see, again, I watched a very good discussion between David Fuller, Daniel Thornton, and Mike. I don't remember Michael's name. The guy from
Future. Yeah, from the Future.
Yeah, and they're really, and they're doing something. Sorry, this word sounds dismissive, and it's not. So please, charity on this word. They're trying to do something more practical, right? Right, in that they're trying to figure out. They feel the pulse of this change, and that they're trying to figure out the practices that will catch the current, the kairos of this change, and hopefully tap into it and afford it, that they see happening in discourse and dialogue. And like I say, I feel that the project I'm engaged in right now is so resonant with what they're talking about. I feel a kind of an urgency to it precisely because of that. It's like, yeah, this is the kairos. This is what's happening, and we need to get, more articulation, both in the sense of linguistic and theoretical articulation, but also articulation in our actions, in our practices. We need to, we need to keep moving both of those forward together. And I think this is very exciting. And like I said, well, you and I are both talking to Jordan. Jordan Hall is trying to get more of us talking together and working on trying to understand this. It's all very exciting to see these. I include you in this, right? And I'm trying to include you as much as I can in this project. Yeah. You're valuable and important to it. But all these people of tremendous talent and expertise and depth, coming together and really trying to, do that. It sounds so simple, but do the thing you were pointing to. They want to get to the point where they can step back and somehow articulate and, name, in the biblical sense of naming, what it is that we're doing right now.
Yes.
Right? We're all wrestling with something, right? And we're all wrestling profoundly and deeply. What is it? What is it? What is it? And we keep asking this, and we should keep asking it.
Right. And there's a sense in which, and this is where we really got to in the conversation with Jordan Hall, the one that I've had with him so far, because there's this moment where we felt so in the tension of, at least I think both of us were very present to this recognition of, to name it in a certain sense, in such a way that there's a danger in naming it, that it could go into that.
Yes.
Right? The logic, if you will, the logic versus the logos, just that awareness of that danger. And it was just really great being with him, both of us being ever increasingly aware of that danger, but somehow dancing with it in such a way that that awareness itself allowed it to emerge, right? Like, so I think something about what Heidegger maybe, because this thought is, of all the things I've ever read of Heidegger, I'm sorry, let me just turn this off here so we can not be disturbed by the social media. Hang on one second. Do not disturb. Okay. Yeah, so there's this sense of where I think Heidegger talked about this one thing that I've been thinking about for 20 years since I've been reading him, which is where he's framing a lecture he's about to give. And I think it's like for the death of Heisenberg or some physicist or something. And he starts off the lecture and he talks about that, perhaps we should want to listen to the work of the person who we're celebrating their death over and over and over again. And it would be wise for us not to demand immediate intelligibility, right?
Yeah, very much.
Like if the painter was here, right, and we were standing before the work, like his painting, like with him, we should want to look at it for a long time and still not demand that it be immediately intelligible to us. And he kind of goes through these things in which it highlights a kind of obviousness where it seems still sensible to have a sensible response and not having that demand, which are few. Like we have a listening that isn't apt to listen to the world that way most of the time, but there's still a few places, right? And then he brings it into philosophy, which is his world, right? Which is like, not so with philosophy. We seem to demand that it be immediately graspable and even in service of giving us the good life, right? And then he kind of goes on, he says, like, but perhaps philosophy is speaking to that, that which is both determinate to the philosopher, the poet, and the scientist, which is to realize that the question of being is still not yet articulated, right? And he goes on, okay, now let me give you a hint on how to listen to the lecture, which is interesting just in itself, that there's ways that we listen first of all, is just can be mind-boggling when you really look at it. And then he says, instead of listening to a series of propositions, perhaps we can follow the movement of showing.
Yes, I think that's a very important thing. So a couple things I want to say in response. First of all, when you talked about a question that you've been thinking about for 20 years, that brought a deep smile to my face, because you're exemplifying, I think, what you're talking about. The ability to stay with something, which, there's a way you can misunderstand that. And I don't think this is what you're saying. There's a way in which people could say, people can confuse staying with something, like when you stay in a relationship, and think about, there's always that danger, and you shouldn't demand too much intelligibility too fast from your partner, right? There's that. Okay, so think about not confusing staying with something with being stuck, because those aren't the same. Being stuck is like when you have that, all right, there's the lock and you can't move, and there's, right? Okay. Whereas when you're staying with something, it's not so much, it's not, maybe questioning is the wrong word. It's more like questing, right? That what you're staying with it, you're staying in the quest, you're staying with it. More and more happens, right? And I only mean this by an analogy, but again, you get into a sense of partnership with the phenomena, that I have with my partner.
Yeah.
Right. And it's so there's people can, and this is one of the great mistakes when people look at philosophy is, well, you guys are talking about this stuff for hundreds of years. Well, and you're so slow, and it's like, well, some problems take centuries to discuss.
Yeah.
And some relationships take years, real years, before you start to get a sense of what's going on in them. And it's, and I think that's what Heidegger's pointing to. And it's the same thing with Plato. Plato in the seventh letter says, you read all this stuff, including his own work, he says, but you have to live with somebody for a long time, until the spark, and you can't make it. You have to make yourself receptive to it until the spark catches between two people. Yeah. And then he says, then you'll understand my philosophy.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that dwelling with, that we find when we stay with somebody in a partnership that's not the dry, barren stuckness, but is actually this fecund flow. Right. I think that's what he's trying to talk about. And the trick of it is, for me, I guess, is, I'm an educator and I'm a scientist, so I have to try and bring theoretical clarity to this topic that I want to discuss. That's part of what I have to do.
Yeah.
Right? And I have to do it, right? So I have a condition on me that you don't face when you're encircling.
Yeah.
In that I have to, in addition to, fully participating in it, and that I'm joining a circling group and things like that, and doing these kinds of conversations with you and Jordan, for example, and Chris.
Yeah.
Right? But in addition to that, I also have to try and I have to bring a theoretical articulation to it that isn't actually properly part of it, but nevertheless has to be wedded to it in the appropriate manner.
Yeah.
And that's the tricky thing. Like, people are craving a language, like I often say it, like a vocabulary and a grammar, to talk about this. What is it we're doing? This dialogue, dialogos, dialectic, this transformative discourse within, distributed cognition. What is it we're doing? How does it work?
Right.
And I'm very sensitive to your concern, and that's why I use the biblical sense of naming. We don't want to name it in an idolatrous fashion. We don't want to name it such that we think that by naming it we can summon it at will.
Yes.
Right. But at the same time, and again, we don't want to have a premature intelligibility. But on the other hand, we don't want to leave people bereft. Right. That's the trick.
That's the trick. So right there, just even like that, you use that metaphor, trickster, right?
Yeah. There's a playfulness. Yeah.
Hermetic, right?
Yep.
There's quality of like, and what's interesting about Hermes, mythically. So Hermes is my understanding is the god that is, he's not totally a god and he's not totally human, right? So he's the one with the wings on the ankles and on the head, right? Yeah. So Hermes is like hermeneutic phenomenology is this place that it doesn't totally go, it both weds
yep
and isn't wedded at the same time and transcends both earth and heaven, right?
Yes
In this way, this in-between way,
which is why he's a vehicle for transformation continually,
right? Exactly. And what's really interesting about Hermes, and I heard this, I think, through Hillman, although I haven't been able to find it in the actual myth, so I don't know if it's actually true, but it makes sense if it is, which is where Hermes has been wedded to is Hestia, which is the goddess of domesticity.
I don't know that.
One of the things that Hillman kind of draws out psychologically is like, but when Hermes isn't in its right place, it becomes manic and it becomes divorced of Hestia. Where Hermes is just this forever, which I think you could say, some would say is like postmodernism, right? In that sense of the word, just the spinning off of like forever interpretations, but with no sense of any ground or recognition of ground. That the sense of home and domesticity, of regularity, of a sense of security.
I think that's. I hope the myth is true,
right?
Because I think it's great. I hope the myth is true.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I think Chris and I argue this in the book, and I argued it in the series. I think part of what sacredness is to have, again, this tonos, this existential tension between that which homes us, and that which exposes us to the numinous. The sacred, right, is that which the experience of sacredness is to be constantly, in tension between these. Because I think that's sort of powerful higher order relevance realization. You've got the part that's assimilating, right, and abstracting what can be held as invariant, but you've got the part that's constantly varying, opening you up to the numinous, the unexpected. And the thing is, like Hermes and Hestia, right? But many of our sacred symbols, they have this polar tension within them, precisely because, right? They home the. Think of Zeus. Zeus, he defeats the monsters with his lightning bolt and homes the world for mankind, but he's also the capricious deity that can suddenly loose the lightning bolt at you, right? So the numinous and the homing are always there. It reminds me of a line from C.S. Lewis, Paul Vanderklay would like this, where the children are talking about Aslan, and one of the kids says, "Well, is he tame?" And they go, "Oh goodness, no, he's not tame, but he's good, right? He's numinous, he's not tame." But there's a part, but he's good. He contributes to the homing. There's the two are always there together. And this is exactly what I'm trying to get is like, I want to talk about this, right? In a way in which, one of the ways here, this is what I want to say. Sorry, you're helping me a lot. One of the ways in which we could be premature we could grasp at premature intelligibility would be to simply try to resolve the tension.
Yeah.
With some kind of pat definition or method, some algorithmic rule or procedure, right? And that's not what you need to do with the theory. The theory needs to articulate the tension so that it can be creatively participated into its depths. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah. What's it like what I heard you said when you said, you're helping me here.
That was great.
Like you just articulated it, right? Like what's it just like, having just articulated it, your project.
It felt like a path opened up.
Yeah.
It's exactly like from my chest, a path opened up and you and I are together on it, right? That's what it felt like. It felt like that.
That's awesome. That when you talked about that tension, articulate it, right? Yes. To articulate the tension, the question, the dialogue, right? And also what you talked about, I really felt it the moment you said it was yeah, coming at this as a professor and a scientist, right? My job, right,
Yes, very much.
is almost, in some ways, is almost never attainable. But you found a thing I'm appreciating, and I think so many people so deeply appreciate about you, right? And both about you personally and also what comes through you, right? Is this deep fidelity, right? To allow, as you talk about, is to face the mystery and really look at the mystery and be technically precise while not solving the mystery, as if, right? But to articulate the mystery in such a way that we find ourselves more and more intelligently involved in it, right? Right? Which is,
thank you for saying that.
I think I think I just appreciated it, like, in a big way, like more than I have before, and I think I did before, but there's a way that it just really hit me in that moment of, oh yeah, like not only are you up to the task that many of us have been up to it, but there is actually, you're looking at subjects where you have a lot of scrutiny, right? Or at least a history of a gaze of scrutiny for technical precision on the very thing that demands, right, it not be concealed in that precision. It's just, I think I just really felt the risk.
There is
beauty
and that's
doing.
There is, and that's why the word you used, fidelity, really rang with me. That was a really, really appropriate word. It really sang to what's happening right here. Yeah, there's a kind of carefulness, right? Which it's not a confusion of words you want to avoid. It's a confusion of modes of intelligibility, right? There's theorizing, and it has its role and its place, and then that's different from actually undergoing transformation. And so I try to help myself and help the people that I'm teaching or talking with to try and not confuse them together. I often say, don't confuse properties of your theory with properties of what your theory is about, and vice versa. So that's a tremendous responsibility that we need to pay much more careful attention to. I think just generally, everybody needs to pay much more careful attention to not engaging in that kind of confusion. Not thinking that your mode of intelligibility has to be the same, right? Has to share the properties with the thing you're talking about at all times. And so that's a very tricky thing. So, I mean, you want to write, for one of the examples I use is, sometimes you need to write really clear prose about the deepest poetry. And you will not do a good job if you just write another poem, because you'll just defer people in their attempts to understand poetry. But on the other hand, you can't just make it a dry analysis, right? It's got to have the clarity that nevertheless evokes. Right. It calls out. It gets, right. It's in that creative relationship with the poem. That's sort of how the analogy I used in my mind. There's the poesis of relevance realization and sense making, and then there's the theory, which is the prose, and they're trying to get those two to, like I say, like somebody who's writing a really clear, insightful prose essay about a poem by Rilke, right? And it's not another poem, right? But it's not independent from the. You see what I'm trying to get at? It's wedded to the poem in the right way.
Yeah. Just this weddedness, right? This weddedness, totally.
Well, I think that's why I think that's why the biblical notion for knowing is da'ath, which implies sexual intercourse. This is how you're supposed to know God, and I don't mean anything pornographic by it. I mean it's that weddedness, right? That weddedness, or like taste and see that the Lord is good, right? I'm not a Christian or anything, that, but those metaphors, right? Again, about because taste is the sense that weds us to something.
Yeah. Taste and weddedness. So there's also a quality in taste there is that, yeah, there is that quality where someone who has good taste seems to be, the taste is defined, the being of taste, having taste seems to be defined in what it is pregnated in its absence, right? So it's like when someone who has good taste, it seems to me, versus someone who doesn't have good taste, right, is they'll come to a situation and they'll be able to draw out and be impregnated by,
yes,
right,
exactly,
all of the multiple relations that are available, versus someone who doesn't will eat the same meal,
yep,
will not be impregnated by. So it's, I think what I'm hearing you say is is it fair to say that the theory in which that's called forth through the mystery that one sees, or the poet, right, that writes the poem, and the listening that can hear it, that there's a certain way that like listening can call forth a theory that is part of being allowing one to be able to taste all the food that the poet.
yeah. Think about the connoisseur, and notice how that's a French word for knowing, right?
Yeah.
Think about the connoisseur. They bring an articulation, not just in thought. They have right. They bring an articulation, a discerning ability to discriminate, right, between aspects and features and structures within what they're tasting. So the connoisseur, right, unfolds, right. But that doesn't mean that the words can capture what it is to taste the wine. You have to still taste the wine, right? But what they do is they write this articulation. Like I said, it's wedded, and I like your word impregnate. It's like it opens it up so that the structure in the wine through the experience of the taste actually transforms, our perspectival knowing in a deep way. And I think, yeah, that's what I've been trying to do. With my series, it's like I don't want to explain away. That's not what I'm trying to do. Right. I'm critical of certain metaphysical positions and things like that, but I very much want to try and, well, like I said, I want to give a theory that bleeds into theoria. Right, that the theory, the explanatory structure leads you into theoria in that sense of that participatory contemplation of things.
Wow. Theoria.
Well, that's why I have the words tattooed on my leg. I have a word that basically, means sort of theory and then into theoria. You want to? I've succeeded if I've led somebody through good theory into deep theoria.
Huh.
That's my criterion of success.
Yeah. So I think you're leading me into theoria right now.
We're doing it for each other, I think.
Yeah. Which is, I would imagine, is part of theoria.
Yes, it is. So part of what
we can't quite tell who's doing who to what, right?
Very much.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things I'm trying to explore. What's the because dialectic has these two meanings in the Neoplatonic tradition. It means something done in dialogue with people.
Yeah.
But it also, but it also connects to theoria in that it's also something you do with being. You go through the anagoge through dialectic as well. So there's deep connections between theoria and dialogos that need to be unpacked and explored. And that's also something, because there's a horizontal and a vertical dimension to dialectic, and they're always deeply interpenetrating and interaffording each other.
Right. Wow. So part of what I'm imagining, so I'm trying to imagine being you, right? Okay. With having that's why I said, you're like, I'm sure there's a lot in that laugh. There's a lot of information. But being someone who actually has somebody permanently on their body, right? This tattooed from theory to theoria, right? That transformational realization. And then watching the conversations that you're having, not just watching the lectures that you're giving, right? and then watching also the conversations that you're both having with people, right? Of which I think this one's one of them.
Very much, very much.
And that you're witnessing other people have, many of who are, if not sourced by your dialogue, in direct relationship to the meaning crisis work that you've been doing. So I'm just trying to be you and be inside of this and try to imagine what a day like or a week is like for you. God,
well,
this is right. It brings tears to my eyes just imagining what that must be like, right, for you in so many ways.
Well, I do similar things in my imagination about you, trying to what it's like for you to have all these great conversations and doing all this circling. I mean, you get to leave. This is meant as admiration, not envy. You get to live a kind of Socratic life that I would love, right? And so I think that's something I appreciate about you. I admire that. And I mean, Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. So I imagine yours to be very worth living. Yeah. Precisely because of all of these great examinations all this Socratic emulation you're doing. I think it's really, really something like to be treasured. For me, I mean, things are very good now again, in no small part due to people like Chris and to Sarah. I've said her name a couple times, so there's no sense trying to pretend I didn't say. But for a very long time, it was the Nietzschean thing for me. If you stare long enough into the abyss, it starts to stare back. Because I was wrestling with the meaning crisis for a very long time, and for I'm sorry, that's not meant to connote that I've sort of solved it or something like that. I mean, I'm trying to give people ways of responding. But what I meant was I was suffering the meaning crisis for a very long time, in that it was undermining my agency at times in powerful ways. And I think and reflection, and this is why, and I've apologized to this to my previous partners, I think it impacted negatively on my relationships. I speak from experience when I say people can, in that vampiric fashion, try to draw from the relationships all that God and history try to do. And when you're in the depths of suffering the meaning crisis, that desire to draw from people can become, and it did for me, become inappropriate and too demanding. I think so. I think I was hard on people. Not, I don't mean in a malicious way. I wasn't hard-hearted, but I think it was very hard to be around me. And so I've come to appreciate, again, what a gift it is to be with Sarah and to have friends like Chris. And precisely because they've, and to meet people like you, because it's all part of, for me, a personal transformation. When I'm talking about trying to help people awaken from the meaning crisis, this is not just a theoretical thing. You're the best.
Hey there.
Hey, what happened?
Oh, my power went off.
Technology is the god that limps.
Like it flipped over the switch. We were right. Oh my God, we were right in a crescendo of a.
Well, I that point is still resonating within me. The point I wanted to make is, as I was saying, the best teaching is when you're sharing your ongoing learning with your students. And when I'm trying to teach about awakening from the meaning crisis, because I'm going through this personally, existentially, right? And it's very present to my mind what this is and what this means. And so it's what we're talking about. I want all of the theoretical work I'm doing, and I'm building this very complex theoretical machine, to use our metaphor, to stay wedded to the process that I am currently within, awakening from the meaning crisis, and I'm seeing many people within. And that's what I'm trying to do. So to get back to the point that started all this, I think now I have a very good life, But I don't know, I don't want to disparage my life before, but I think, like I said, I think I was hard on relationships and the people that related to me. Again, not maliciously. I think I can be compassionate towards myself and say that. But really, really, like the Nietzschean thing, really looking really deeply into the bits. And I think a lot of times it was looking back out through me. And people were like, oh, John is so dark. So that was a common way of talking about me. And I don't feel so dark now. And so,
what would you say is the difference? That's like, what's the difference such that what I'm not hearing you say is that you're looking any less at the abyss.
That's right.
Right. In fact, it sounds like you're looking at it even more somehow.
Yes.
Right.
But
however, something's different. Like, what's the difference?
I'm no longer stuck. I'm staying with it, but I'm no longer stuck in it. That's the big difference. That's what I was trying to articulate earlier, right?
Okay, got it.
There's a partnership in which, and Nishitani talks about this in Religion and Nothingness. When the nothingness goes from being the stuckness, the empty-ended dead ending of nihilism, to the sense of the inexhaustible that you are da'ath with. That's the difference. That's the difference.
Wow. I want to sit with that for a moment and really listen to what you just said. Because there's as my understanding of the way that Socrates listened to his daemon, right?
Yes.
Right. And listening in the sense of midwifery, right? So I feel in some way what I'm hearing you say is like I think personally we can all look at those points where we're that which feels like we're going through the birth canal, right?
Yes, yeah.
Losing oxygen, we don't remember time, therefore the suffocation's forever, but there's something pulling us. And then there's those moments where we're digesting, where we're actually taking something in, right? We're more of the sense of the midwife, like midwifering it from, right? So I'm in the point of feeling like we're in the presence of like midwifing something, just like right now, as I'm kind of taking in my understanding of your life, also is taking in the understanding of that dialogos relationship itself, like within your life. I'm also getting the logos at the same time, and everything that we're talking to, which is in some way is characteristic of the phenomena that we're describing, but also the phenomena we're in right now.
Very much.
In this moment, but also the moment that we're in, where we get to have these conversations. And you get to witness these conversations, informing your work and revealing your work to you at the same time. This is why I think when you texted me the other day, there's been certain moments where you've texted me and I can feel you in the inspiration of what's happening. And you're just like, something is really emerging here, isn't it? Do you feel it? I'm like, yeah, I totally feel it.
Yeah.
I think we're starting to articulate more of what you mean when you say that. Like,
I think so too. And I think it's very much like the Socratic project of trying to help something, help give birth to something, to participate in a birth. You're not making the child, you're not merely receiving the child. You're getting wedded and involved and enmeshed in the birthing of the child. So yeah, that's very much that. You're also helping me in this dialogue to realize how deeply informative of what I'm doing right now, my relationship to Sarah is. Like I was coming to see how deep of a template it is becoming for me in so many ways. I had a sense of this. This is why I was using it as a metaphor, but I didn't realize how deep it went. Right. Thank you for that. That's been something that's sort of coming more clear in my mind now. And so this is something that I guess, is also part of what you see in the Socratic dialectic, and that people miss when they just extract the propositional arguments. Socrates has and this is connoted by the midwifery metaphor, right? He has a deep capacity to deeply know, often better than they know themselves, the people he's talking with, right? And so there's that deep connectedness that Drew Hyland talks about in his work on Socrates, and I see that now. There's a deep relationship between our ability to relate in dialogos and our ability to connect deeply to other people. So that sounds so trivial to say. I'm sorry, but I'm trying to articulate an insight right here. There's a way in which the deep participation, the deep conformity between two people that are in da'af together, it grounds and develops the grammar that we use when we're trying to bring it up into like something like philosophia. I hadn't seen how deeply those connections are. Does it make sense? What I'm saying?
Well, let me see. I think my tears do. I'm feeling like I don't know if you can see, like I feel moved, and yeah. I think that I felt moved throughout the conversation. I specifically really felt moved when you brought it back to the very beginning of what we started to talk about, where you went, oh, I'm starting to see, when you said, I'm starting to see my relationship with Sarah. Like, and yes. What you started to talk about was, where we opened, right, was where we were talking about, it seems like that there seems to be some connection between the depth of my relationship with her and who I'm coming to know her to be continually. And then somehow that connection being tapping into the inexhaustible intelligibility. And then we went through this whole this whole ride, right, where we were talking about talking. We were talking about talking and coming to terms in the demand to come to terms in such a way that articulates the question that we engage with more deeply, right? Mm-hmm. And the unique sense in your own personal life where that has been that's required you to look at the abyss while having scientific demands that you bring it into technical terms. But that unique relationship that you have as a professor, as a teacher, but also as a person, but all the way up to this point where we're talking about the current conversation that we're in, that brought it all together in this moment where you recognize the very thing that we were talking about in the beginning, all the way through your life. So here's a moment of what kind of walking through that, where I'm hit by dialectic, dialogos, the theoretical birthing, the theoros. In this moment, in my listening,
it's the fact that it circles like that. Plato talks about that. The dialogues often do that circle too, right? There's something about that communication is grounded in communing, because the communing gets us to trust in the open-ended. I think our lives make us suspicious of conversations in ways that are permeated into levels of our psyche that we're not even aware of. But when we can genuinely commune with somebody, right? That communing, like I said, it trains us in trust, so that a kind of communication is possible that's not otherwise possible. I'm struggling to articulate, but the two words that keep singing to each other in my mind right now is this relationship between communication and communing. And there's something going on there, right? And my ability to commune with somebody very deeply because of her depth and her maturity and her fundamental goodness, right, has restored a kind of trust in me that permeates my ability to communicate with others. Wow. We learn more by modeling than we do just by talking, right?
Yeah.
We really do. We really, really do.
Yeah. And is it fair to say that there's this the thing that you're really getting at that's emerging, that's taken on some level, what I'm hearing is a lifetime, right?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's
your whole
I
life,
think
at some level, your whole life personally, but also the life of what you've been pondering and thinking about and being confronted with in this moment right now. All of them on some level are like right here to the very tip of the thing that you're going, oh yeah, what's singing to me now? But when you say singing to me now, what's interesting is what I hear, like literally the song that's being sung is so connected to all of that, right? Such that the singing now is the next level of the dialogos, right?
Because I'm picking up on the one way in which the logos differs from the logic, because the logos is the gathering of things such that they come to belong together, right? And so what you have is all these things that have not yet belonged together. And think about all the relevance realization going on there. But you now gather them up. They've been gathered up so that they now belong together. And that belonging together is the communing that makes the communication deeper. Do you see? That's what I'm trying to articulate.
Yes. And that, in what you're also talking about, I just want to highlight this because like on my side of the street, there's this quality of like, I have been trying to do that for the longest time. I know. What you're witnessing right now with me, with you, with these other conversations, John, at this level, I just haven't really had that many people to talk to, right?
Yeah, I was talking to Jordan about this.
Yeah. So there's this quality on one level, like, yeah, I've been doing courses in this work. And a lot of like the coursework has just really been a function of my madness for it, right? Right. But there's a way in which most of my philosophical inquiry with Heidegger and the existentialists and everyone else has been really something that has been going on for me for the most part by myself, that I've been bringing to the conversation. But there's not a lot of people that are necessarily predisposed to being interested in this level that we're talking about, right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
So there's a way in which that you're bringing to light this horizon where it's not just about, as you said the other day, it's not just about agape, it's logos, right?
Yes, yeah.
It's like the agape in some level requires the previous moving of the logos before it for it to be able to see that, to become seers of it, right?
Yes,
that allow us to give birth to it, and that mutual autopoetic, self-transcending, yet integrating what we transcended, that quality on some level. What I think that you're thinking about right now, it's so important because it's not just personal intimacy. It's intimacy that can reveal what's worth being intimate about, right?
I think that's well said. I had a student, he was a very good student, and he said, I think your stuff of the meaning crisis is really an intimacy crisis. It's that people have lost a sense of being able to be intimate with reality and intimate with what's good and what's true and what's beautiful. And then while you were saying that, I was thinking of this, and I was hearing, for some reason, Paul saying it rather than my own voice in my head. So that's good. I was hearing him saying, on arche and logos, in the beginning was the word, because right in the beginning is the logos. You were trying to articulate that, right? That the way the logos is this sort of, this arche, this foundational principle that makes it all possible. Yeah, I think both of those things. I don't know how they sit together. And then the third thing, there was a third thing, which was Jordan Hall and I were talking about just this, and they all relate to each other. I'm not quite. I don't quite get the pattern yet, but it's there, right? Is this having peers? And I'm trying to do it too, and I'm trying to pick up also that it also means looking deeply, to have peers that we that to talk to. It is very, very important. And
Yeah.
Getting people to experience communing in peerage, I think is a really fundamental thing. And that's how I see, again, this ability to draw things together so that they belong together. That's in the beginning, right? And that's the ground from where the intelligibility is constantly emerging. And I think that's always phenomenologically mysterious to us.
Right.
I mean, I think we can theoretically talk about it, but you can't jump outside your framing. You can never get outside it, right? There's always something, you're always enmeshed in it. You can move from frame to frame. We're not prisoners in that sense, but you can't, right? Anything that's inside the frame is not itself the logos, right? It's only what the logos has articulated into the frame. That's what I mean when I try and talk about, Heidegger's main insight of what things are constantly shining in as articulation, but we also get a sense of the deep recessing, right, into the, the depths of the logos, the depths of the inexhaustible.
Wow. So I just keep a couple things. So I need to go on to my next.
Sure, that's fine.
I feel sorry for my client because they're just going to get like a boat. What I'm present to is, perhaps this is this probably plays on some of the relationships that we're talking about that are singing to each other. So on one level, there's this experience of like, now you're trying to what I heard you say is I'm trying to articulate what's coming into just coming into being. There's something I can feel, but I don't quite, it's come together. For me, it's coming together as it's singing of my nervous system. Like my nervous system feels like it's like humming and meaning right now. And like, so much so that it's like, it's so full of meaning that it's like it's pushing water out of my eyes, And there is this quality of this mystery, this mystery that's been there for me, which is how do I know to be struck by something before I understand what I'm struck by? In that sense, I feel like I'm understanding that at a level of feeling of where, there's something about the feeling of being moved where the way that we've been communing brings in so much richness that we're now standing out on top of something that's informed by what was logos, which became logic that we stood on because it was relationship with it. We stand on it to reveal more of it.
This is what I mean when I try to say very deeply that relevance realization is transjective. It's pre-egoic, it's pre-conceptual, it's before the co-determination of the agent and the arena. And we can talk about it scientifically, but that doesn't mean, right, that again, that I've explained it away. The whole time you were saying what you were saying, there's one of my favorite scenes in Equus, where it's near the end, Dysart, the therapist, is saying, yes, but explain me. And he's talking about Equus. How is it that all of these things come together and become something sacred? How do they come together, right? And he has a sense of this because he's bearing witness to this epiphany, and he's able to, he does midwifery. He does the therapy on I can't remember the character's name, right? And it's that, it's that these things, you can't make a symbol. The symbol has, you have to, neither can you just receive a symbol. If I just give it to you, it's not, it has to transjectively emerge. And that's part of, I think, what we're trying to do here. There's an element, again, in which the articulation is an attempt, right, not to just, so part of it is the theory into theoria, but part of it is, as I say, is to respect what symbols are trying to be born, the poiesis, right? And again, and so that's what the Neoplatonism for me is such a powerful template, because you can see, right, Plato he just moves seamlessly between the poetry and the theory and the theoria. Those three are just seamlessly talking to each other at all times.
Wow.
And that's a really important template. You need to go back and recover, not the purported Platonic metaphysics or the arguments, but this ability to get the theory, the theoria, and the poiesis mutually consonant with each other.
The perfect place to complete.
Yes, very much. So good to talk to you, my good friend. So good to talk to you.
So good to talk to you, my good friend. Yes.
Yeah.
Many more to come.
Oh, for sure.
Yes.
And let's keep up the good text dialogues. I like those textual conversations. They're a lot of fun.
Yeah,
I like the way they come out of the blue from you. Like, boom, and you'll just say, what about Heidegger on this? And I was like, oh, wow.
Take care.
Take care. Take care.